Welcome to the New Vintage family. Doing Life Tandem is our
Yes.
session 5. We're so glad you joined us again. We believe this study series is going to impact your marriage, your family, and your legacy.
Amen,
There
yes.
is no greater joy than family.
Not
we
at
want
all.
to encourage people that family is cool.
It's been a great study so far.
Our culture would try to make us think that family is the least important thing that you do, and it is the most important thing. At the end of
It's
our
the most
lives, we look
rewarding.
back at our relationships and we recognize how important they really were and how really many times we didn't invest where we should have been investing. So Gary, I want to
Yes.
talk a little bit about the story of our courtship. How we got
Okay.
started. Everybody has a beginning. Every relationship has a story. And as you're doing this series, I encourage you to talk about your story when we're finished today. Talk about how you got started. It rekindles some of the romance, the commitment, the vision, the dreams that you had as a couple. So Gary, how did we get started?
Well, to make a long story short, I worked at a drapery installation company and in Tulsa, and you were hired to work there as well.
Right,
So
right. You
we kind
actually
of-
he put the ad out for a salesperson for this drapery company that he
That's
was
right.
installing draperies at, and I answered the ad because I needed a job. So I remember the first day I met you. I can see you, and I have a freeze frame. You have to know, I kind of like had this feminist attitude. I was a feminist, never going to get married, never going to have children, but I was going to use men before they used me. So it wasn't that I didn't like men. It was like, I'll just take advantage of them before they take advantage of me. We'll see who's in control here. So it was a really totally wrong, hardened attitude, which I think is pretty much prevalent in our culture. I might have been some in the earlier days of it, but now we see that whole teaching, that whole attitude coming full circle, and we see what it's done to marriage and family. So I remember you walking.
Well, let's back up now. You were born again.
Yeah,
Okay,
no, I
so
got
that-
born again, went out to Oral Roberts University. I was always going to get a college education. So when I got born again, it just changed where I was going to get my education. And I decided to go out to Oral Roberts University. It was the only Christian school I'd ever heard of. So I thought, I'll go out there. I don't know too much about them, but I'll go see. So I needed a job, pay for my school. And I answered the ad that Gary put out at the college on the bulletin board. Little did I know what God had in plan in store.
I guess I'm trying to say your attitude is no longer, I'm going to use men before they use me.
No,
God
no,
has
no,
changed
no,
your
no, no.
heart, completely
No,
changed
yeah.
you, and now you're wanting to
Right.
pursue
and
God.
I shared that in the last session. But
Yeah.
anyway,
So we're there, yes.
Right. I see you coming out from the water cooler, and I can still see him right now, freeze frame, bushy, big, curly fro, a flannel shirt, some jeans. It's kind of hipster, kind of what's happening right now, right?
Yeah, guess so.
Anyway, and he had like a Tootsie Pop roll in his mouth, and he's like got this little coy look on his face, which I've seen in several of our children, and he kind of gets this little look on his face with his Tootsie Roll Pop, and he blushes, he turns red, and I just see that, I have that freeze frame, and I remember when I saw him thinking, is this the one? Now, I quickly rebuked that because I thought, you don't even know this person. And before I kind of dated around and I decided I'm serving God once I got born again, and I'm like, I'm not dating anyone else. I'm going to wait for what you have, God. And so for me to see this person and immediately think that I thought my flesh or something crazy, why would I even think such a thought? So anyway, we worked together. He was very shy, very quiet. I wasn't. So we would, talk a little bit at work about God. It was always about God, always about God's word. He only jogged, read the Bible, and worked. And that's all I ever saw of Gary. We were just friends, nothing more, just friends. And so one day when we were at work.
You're not going to tell him that.
I'm going to tell him. I actually have permission to tell this, or I wouldn't.
Okay.
But he comes from that little same place in the office, walks right up to me. And we worked for a Spirit-filled Catholic lady who really felt like we were supposed to be together. We didn't know it, but she was plotting. She was praying. She was working behind the scenes to help pull us together. So anyway, Gary walks out of the office where we would turn in our cells and things. He walks out and he walks up to me. He gets that little coy look on his face and he kisses me. And it was like shock of all shocks. I mean, this guy is shy. He's quiet. He hardly says anything, but he's a fast mover. Anyway, so.
You just got too close. I mean,
He just gave me a little sweet peck. And then he said, and his face turned as red as could be, and he said, I am so sorry. That will never happen again.
I lied
I
about that
promise. I promise. So anyway, that's kind of how our courtship started. Started fast, went from friendship to that. And so we really didn't ever date, but our sweet little spirit-filled Catholic boss, she'd say, Drenda, Gary's going to go and install some draperies, and I think that you should go and help make some pictures for the home show. And I remember thinking, why can't Gary use a camera? You know what I mean? I'm thinking, okay, well, maybe she thinks I'm a woman. I'm going to have a better angle or whatever. And then she'd hand Gary a $20 bill and say, and guys, go get some pizza or get something to eat for lunch. Little did we know she was setting us up. So we're just friends, and, you know, nothing's really happening. And I'm thinking, I'm really disturbed. I'm thinking, does he like me? Does he not? Does he like me? Does he not? And it really bothered me because I kind of had some guys chasing after me that I wasn't interested in and cut off relationships. I'm like, what's with this guy? You know, I'm still fairly new believer, and so I'm trying to figure this out. I tried my persuasive tricks and nothing was working. So anyway, it bothered me that he didn't like me. So then he asked me out on my birthday, and I was like excited, okay, our first kind of date thing. And about an hour, maybe 30 minutes before our date.
Now, you have to be careful here. I am their pastor, you know. It's just,
he calls me and cancels. I'm left. I'm left in my dorm room on my birthday. All my friends in the dorm have already left because Gary's taking me out. And he cancels. So I'm like, what a jerk. I will never go out with him. I will never.
I don't know why I canceled either.
You got cold feet is what happened. Because at Christmas time before this, he told his mom, there's this girl at work. She's really pretty and she's a friend, but I would never marry her. She's so fickle. So.
Well, should I tell him why?
There was guys chasing me across the country.
Yes, there were guys chasing her across the country. So
and they were
I wasn't going to get involved in that mix, but anyway.
So any guy that came to visit me, I would send them to Gary's apartment to stay.
They were staying in my room, in my house.
So anyway, so what was going on is he kind of liked me, but he didn't want to let himself like me. So anyway, long story short, one day God just spoke to him. You tell him what happened.
Well, obviously God had a plan. And so we were friends, worked together for, I don't know how many months together. And then one day after we had
6 months, 8 months.
Been working together there spiritually and talking and becoming friendship, God just spoke to me one day. She had come over to drop something off at the apartment, just dropped it off at the door, and God spoke to me, this is your wife. So 2 weeks later, I asked her to marry me, and we'd never been on a date.
And the reason I went to his apartment is the little sweet Catholic lady that we worked for said, Gary is going through a hard time, Drenda. And, you know, he's come to college, he's graduating, and his dad's offered him a pizza business to go back and manage, and he's struggling because God called him to come to school, and he has a call in his life, and I think as a friend, you should reach out to him. So I prayed for him, and I thought, what could I do? And there's this book that I loved. It was called Come Away, My Beloved, because I kind of lean to the prophetic things. It has all these prophecies in it. It's a really old book because we're really old. We're vintage. We're vintage. We're not old. We're vintage. Anyway, so I thought, I'll take Gary that book. So I wrote him this long thing in the front and how God was going to direct his steps. And I knew God had a great plan for him and a vision for his life and how this book could help me. And I thought it would help him. So I called him and said, could I drop this off? And I dropped it off. And actually, you invited me in. You don't maybe remember this, but he invited me in. I saw his kitchen. There was a plant growing out of the garbage disposal because they had a bird. They dumped the bird seed down the.
Well, I had roommates that were.
Yes, his roommates were quite a pill. Gary is, if you don't know his personality, he's the most tender, gentle person. He gets along with anybody. There's no one he doesn't get along with. So one of the roommates was super hyper perfectionist. The other was, well, let's just say the total opposite end of that, okay?
Well, actually, he had a Kawasaki 1000 tore apart in the bedroom, pieces, engines, everywhere. So it smelled like gasoline.
So he kind of showed me around their apartment.
Was not good.
I see this plant growing out of the kitchen sink. I see, their room, there was a Kawasaki bowls and pans of parts. Their bathroom had grease all over the walls. There was no sheets on the beds. So I really had a compassion at that moment. I was like, this man needs help. He needs a woman. I just got born again, so I'm like open more than I was even before that. So anyway, it wasn't long after that. Hopefully I didn't embarrass you, but
well, that's kind of where I came
from. That's marriage, right?
But,
So anyway, He asked me on a motorcycle ride a few weeks after that. We went on a motorcycle ride, had a good time, invited me to church. He kept going back and forth. He invited me to church, and then when we went to church, he brought a friend, and they sat in the front, and I sat in the back. So every time I think he likes me, he'd do something to make me think he does not like me, and then he'd do something. So it was kind of this back and forth. It'd been that way for probably a month and a half, 2 months, and then he invites me to go for a convertible ride. He borrowed a convertible. I'm like, great. We get in the car, we drive. He pulls into a parking lot. He looks at the clock, pushes the button. It's 1:31. It's March. And I'm like, wow, what's going on? He's about to ask me to marry him. I just had this thought. And he goes, Drenda, God spoke to me, you're my wife, and he asked me to marry him.
God said, that's my wife, and that was a wonderful thing. I was just hesitant, that was it. I just wasn't sure, I didn't want to say anything I wasn't sure of, but
I can understand, I was intimidating.
The bottom line, well, it was all those guys around you that were intimidating.
You got to fight for your woman.
Yes, but I wanted to make sure you wanted to fight for me before I jumped into that mix, that's all.
And the marriage is the important aspect of your family model. If the marriage isn't right, you're only duplicating what the marriage is. So if you're newlyweds, you don't have children, learn. Learn all you can about marriage. If you're not married, you're single, learn all you can about marriage. Improve who you are. Improve your walk with God. Do you want to end the war on sadness? Then click the button right there and subscribe.